I never thought a quiet morning in the suburbs would begin with the sound of destruction. But that day, the noise that ripped me out of sleep wasn't an alarm clock or a barking dog. It was the crunch of metal and wood colliding. A sound so sharp and final that it jolted me out of bed before my eyes were even open. I rushed to the blinds, and there it was. My cedar fence, splintered like matchsticks, and buried halfway through it, nose crumpled, steam hissing from under the hood, sat a black pickup truck. The kind of scene you don't forget. The quiet street, shattered at 5:17 in the morning, by a teenager who had no business behind the wheel. I already knew who it was before I even saw him. In our neighborhood, trouble usually had the same last name. Dawson. Brad Dawson. The infamous son of Karen Dawson, our neighborhood's self-proclaimed queen bee and HOA president. If there was drama, you could bet Karen or her son were at the center of it. I threw on my boots and stepped outside. The air was cool and damp, the smell of burnt rubber still fresh. And there he was. Brad, stumbling out of the driver's side door like the truck had spat him out. His eyes were glassy, his steps uneven. He looked at the wreckage, then at me, and for a moment he seemed more annoyed than guilty. Crazy, right? He mumbled, trying to play it off like we were just two guys laughing about a parking mistake. I didn't answer. My arms were crossed, my jaw tight. The skid marks carved into the asphalt told the story clearly. He had come around the corner too fast, lost control, and plowed straight into my fence. Before I could even say a word, Brad had his phone out. Not to call 911, not to apologize. He was calling his mother. Of course. Within minutes I saw her marching down the street, silk robe flying behind her like a cape. Hair wild, voice already loaded with blame. Karen Dawson, HOA president, neighborhood bully, and defender of all things perfect in her little kingdom. Maddox. "What did you do?" she shouted, before she was even close enough to see the details. She didn't look at the wrecked fence or at her son leaning against the busted truck. No, her eyes were locked on me as if I had somehow caused this. I took a breath, keeping my voice steady. "Morning, Karen. Your boy just test drove my fence." She gasped dramatically and snapped, "It's a trap fence." Too close to the road. "My Bradley could have been killed." I looked at Brad. He wasn't almost killed. He was standing there half-dazed, smelling like cheap air freshener and bad decisions. The only thing dead was the truck's front end and the wooden board scattered across my yard. "He's fine," I said flatly. "My fence isn't. And it's on camera." That's when my wife, Sam, leaned out the window, phone in hand. "Already recorded, already backed up," she called cheerfully. "Morning, Karen. Smile for the cloud." Karen's face flickered, panic for a second, then immediate rage. "You can't record me without consent," she snapped, clutching her robe tighter. "The street's public," I replied. "Your robe's a private decision." Before she could come up with another excuse, red and blue lights flashed at the end of the street. A police cruiser rolled up, sirens off but lights on. The officer stepped out, calm, professional, and immediately taking in the scene. Skid marks, wrecked fence, disoriented teenager, and an HOA president trying to turn the blame on me. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," Karen said, rushing toward him like she'd been waiting for her audience. "This man, Cole Maddox, has an illegal trap fence. It jumped out and attacked my son's truck. You need to cite him immediately and make him pay for the damages." "Yes, you heard that right." According to Karen, my fence had jumped out into the street and attacked her son's truck. The officer blinked slowly, clearly unimpressed, then turned to me. "This your property, sir?" "That's right," I said. "Woke me up about 10 minutes ago." He nodded, then turned his attention to Brad, who suddenly found the pavement fascinating. "Son, have you been drinking tonight?" Brad's "no, sir" came too quickly, too rehearsed. The officer leaned closer, sniffed the air, and told him to step toward the cruiser for a sobriety test. Karen tried to swoop in, pressing a water bottle into Brad's hand. "Hydrate, sweetie," she cooed. The officer's palm came up like a stop sign. "Ma'am, do not interfere again." His voice was firm, commanding, the kind of tone that doesn't leave room for argument. Meanwhile, I stood by, watching the story Karen had planned crumble before her eyes. She wanted me fined. She wanted me blamed. She wanted her son protected at all costs. But the evidence, the skid marks, the footage, and Brad's own condition was stacked against her. The officer called for backup. Another cruiser arrived. They searched the truck, and that's when things went from bad to worse for Brad Dawson. A nitrous canister, used whippets, and, hidden under the seat, a burner phone. I could practically hear Karen's story collapsing like my fence. Her son wasn't just a reckless driver, he was involved in something bigger, something uglier. And as the tow truck hooked up to drag away the crumpled pickup, Karen's shrieks filled the morning air. But no matter how loud she yelled, one truth was clear. Her son crashed his truck into my fence. He tried to make me pay, and instead it was his truck that got towed away, and that was only the beginning. Before that truck turned my fence into splinters, life on Oak Street looked almost picture-perfect from the outside. Our neighborhood was the kind of place real estate agents brag about in glossy brochures. Manicured lawns, quiet sidewalks, neighbors who waved politely even if they didn't know your name. It had that suburban stillness, the kind you expect when you've paid extra for an HOA to protect the community. But like any polished surface, once you looked closer, cracks started to show. And most of those cracks had a name: Karen Dawson. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was the HOA president, self-appointed queen of suburbia. She lived 3 houses down in a 2-story brick home that looked like it was trying too hard to win Yard of the Month. Always fresh mulch, always new potted flowers, always trimmed hedges shaped within an inch of their lives. From the outside, you might think, wow, she really cares about the community. But once you've lived under her rule, you realize the truth. Karen cared about appearances, her appearances. Her son Brad was the same story, just in a younger, sloppier package. Spoiled, entitled, and untouchable. At least that's how Karen treated him. If Brad wrecked a neighbor's garden with his bike, it was the neighbor's fault for planting too close to the sidewalk. If Brad threw a loud party, well, boys will be boys. If Brad drove too fast down our street, Karen would wave it off as youthful energy. It was exhausting. But until that night, my wife Sam and I had learned to let most of it roll off our backs. Sam's a digital wizard. She can set up cameras, manage files, track packages, and run circles around anyone who tries to play games with "he said," "she said." Me? I'm more old school. I like things in order, predictable. A strong fence, a calm yard, a house that feels safe. Between us, we had a system. Sam kept us one step ahead digitally. I kept us grounded. That fence Brad later demolished wasn't just a property line. To me, it was a promise. A boundary that said, this is our space. This is safe. I built it myself 3 years back. Cedar posts sunk deep, every board measured twice. It wasn't just wooden nails. It was work, pride, and the quiet peace of knowing I'd shaped something solid for my family. And peace, honestly, was something we needed. Because life with Karen and Brad in the neighborhood was a constant balancing act. I'll give you an example. One summer, Brad decided fireworks weren't just for the 4th of July. He and his friends lit them in the cul-de-sac at midnight on a random Tuesday. Roman candles, firecrackers, you name it. I went outside to tell them to knock it off, and before I could even finish my sentence, Karen appeared out of the shadows. She had the nerve to accuse me of harassing minors. Harassing minors. Her exact words. The next week, I got an HOA notice about unsightly trash cans being left out too long. Funny thing, they weren't mine. They were Brad's, but she wrote the violation against me. That's how she worked. Shift blame. Protect the boy. Control the narrative. So when I heard that crash at 5:17 a.m., when I saw my fence shattered and Brad's truck wedged into it, I already knew what was coming. Not an apology, not responsibility. Karen was going to spin it. But before we get to that chaos, let me take you inside what life was like in those quiet early mornings. The ones I used to enjoy before this nightmare began. Most mornings, Sam and I would wake up early. I'd make coffee. She'd check emails and neighborhood forums, always keeping an eye out for Karen's little updates about community rules. Sam liked to laugh at them. I just rolled my eyes. We had cameras covering the driveway and the front door, more for peace of mind than anything else. You'd be surprised how often a raccoon or a wandering dog trips those sensors. That morning, though, the sensor didn't go off because of a raccoon. It went off because Brad's headlights careened into our yard like a wrecking ball. When I replay that moment in my head, I realized something. The crash wasn't just an accident. It was an explosion that ripped open the carefully maintained illusion of our neighborhood. Because once that truck hit, everything else, Karen's excuses, the police showing up, the secrets hiding under Brad's recklessness, came spilling out like water from a burst pipe. The chaos started right there, at the intersection of bad parenting and worse decision-making. But let me tell you why it mattered so much. Why it wasn't just about replacing a few boards. Brad wasn't some random kid speeding home from a late-night fast food run. He was a repeat problem, a walking disaster wrapped in entitlement. And Karen? She was the shield that let him keep getting away with it. Every time she protected him, every time she turned the blame on someone else, it taught him the same lesson. You don't face consequences. Someone else does. And that morning, she was ready to teach that lesson again. Sam and I barely had time to process the crash before Karen stormed down the street in her silk robe. No pause to see if her son was okay. No check to make sure I was fine. No apology for the damage. Just a full-throated accusation that my fence, my carefully built, legally approved, city-inspected fence, was too close to the road and had trapped her son's truck. It would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. I could already feel it. This wasn't just a crash. This was going to be a battle, because Karen didn't just want her son protected. She wanted me punished. She wanted the narrative twisted until I was the villain and her son was the poor, misunderstood victim. And if you've never lived under an HOA president like Karen, let me explain something. They don't fight fair. They use fines, notices, public shaming, and twisted versions of the rules to grind you down. And Karen was already planning to do exactly that. The truck crash was the spark. But the fire that followed, it spread fast. Police investigations, HOA retaliation, late-night secrets involving more than just one reckless teen. And in the middle of it all, my wife and I, fighting not just for our fence, but for our home, our peace, and our dignity. Because once the dust settled, it was clear this wasn't about a truck and a fence anymore. This was about Karen's need for control, Brad's spiral into something darker, and whether we had the courage to push back. And that morning, standing in my yard, staring at shattered boards and a steaming pickup, I made a decision. I wasn't going to roll over. Not this time. What I didn't know then was that Brad's wrecked truck wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a chain reaction that would expose secrets, shake the whole neighborhood, and bring Karen's perfect world crashing down. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not a fender bender, not a trash can tipping over, not even a tree branch snapping in the wind. This was heavier, final, a thunderous crunch that rattled my chest and yanked me out of bed. Sam sat upright next to me, her phone already glowing in her hand. "What was that?" she asked, her voice tight with alarm. I didn't answer. I was already on my feet, pulling the blinds open. And there it was. A black pickup truck sat nose first in my fence, its front end crumpled like paper, steam hissing from the radiator. The cedar boards I had built with my own hands were splintered across the lawn like fallen soldiers. My quiet, peaceful street had just been torn wide open. "It's Brad," I muttered, jaw tightening. Sure enough, the driver's side door creaked open. Out stumbled Brad Dawson, lanky and glassy-eyed, swaying like he'd been hit harder than the fence. His hair was a mess, his shirt wrinkled, his phone already in his hand. He didn't even check the damage. He just stared at the wreck, then lifted the phone to his ear, dialing without hesitation. "Call 911. I told Sam. "Single vehicle crash, property damage, disoriented driver, facts only." Then pulled the door cam footage. Sam was already typing, her fingers flying across the screen. "That's why we work. We balance each other. She handles digital, I handle analog." I yanked on my boots and headed outside. The cool air hit me, thick with the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline. And there stood Brad, leaning against the truck like it was just another Friday night, not a disaster zone. "Hey, man," he slurred, waving his phone slightly. "Crazy, right?" I stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. My eyes flicked to the skid marks carved deep into the asphalt. They curved like a signature, looping recklessly before slamming straight into my fence. The story was written in black rubber. He'd been speeding, lost control, and my property had paid the price. "Your fence," Brad started, squinting at the splintered wood. "It just jumped out. I didn't even bother replying." My silence seemed to make him squirm. He shuffled, rocking from foot to foot, searching for words. But before he could dig himself any deeper, the sound of fast footsteps echoed down the street. Here she came, Karen Dawson, storming toward us in a silk robe, hair flying, expression already twisted in outrage. She didn't look at the truck. She didn't look at the wreckage. She looked straight at me. "Maddox!" she shrieked, pointing an accusing finger as if she'd caught me red-handed. "What did you do?" I let out a dry laugh. "Morning, Karen. Your boy just test drove my fence." Her eyes blazed. "That fence is too close to the road. It's a trap fence! My Bradley could have been killed. He's fine, I said calmly. My fence isn't, and it's on camera. Right on cue, Sam leaned out of the upstairs window, phone in hand. Already recorded, already backed up. Morning, Karen, wave to the cloud. Karen froze for half a second, panic flickering across her face. Then she snapped back, doubling down. You can't record me without my consent, she barked. The street's public, I said. Your robe is a private decision. Her lips pressed thin, her eyes narrowing to slits. She was about to unleash another tirade when flashing lights painted the street red and blue. A cruiser rolled up, lights spinning silently. The officer stepped out, tall, steady, surveying the scene with the kind of practiced calm that said he'd seen it all before. A wrecked truck, shattered fence, skid marks, and one furious HOA president. Officer? Thank goodness you're here! Karen practically ran to him, silk robe flapping. This man, Cole Maddox, has an illegal trap fence. It jumped out and attacked my son's truck. I demand he be cited and forced to pay for the damages and for my son's emotional distress. Yes, she actually said that. The fence attacked her son's truck. The officer blinked once, slowly, then turned his head toward me. This your property, sir? That's right, I said. Woke me up about 10 minutes ago. The officer nodded, then turned to Brad. The kid was staring at the ground like it held all the answers to life. Name? Brad Dawson, he mumbled. Son, have you been drinking tonight? The officer asked, voice level. No, sir, Brad said too quickly, too rehearsed. The officer leaned in slightly, nostrils flaring. He stepped back, his expression unreadable. I'm going to need you to step over to my cruiser. We're going to run a few tests. Brad shifted uncomfortably. His hands twitched. He pulled something shiny from his pocket. A breath strip wrapper. Don't put anything in your mouth, the officer barked. Karen swooped in, shoving a water bottle toward her son. Hydrate, sweetie. The officer's hand shot up, palm firm like a wall. Ma'am, do not interfere again. His tone had changed. The weariness was gone, replaced by steel. Brad stumbled through the field sobriety test like a marionette with cut strings. Heel to toe? He nearly tripped. Nose touch? He poked his cheek. Balance? He swayed like a tree in the wind. Another cruiser pulled up. A second officer began circling the wrecked truck with a flashlight. He opened the door, leaned inside, and within moments called out loud enough for everyone to hear. Found something. Passenger floor. Nitrous oxide canister. Used whippet chargers. Brad's face drained of color. Karen's turned beet red. The first officer's jaw tightened. He cuffed Brad without hesitation. Probable cause. Transporting for a blood draw. Karen erupted like a volcano. This is harassment. My son is the victim. You should be investigating him, she screamed, stabbing a finger toward me. Ma'am, the officer said, his voice dropping an octave, sharp as a blade. Step back now. For the first time, Karen faltered. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The tow truck arrived next, its yellow strobes washing the street in surreal light. The driver hooked up the mangled pickup, chains rattling, metal groaning. Karen's screams pierced the air as if the tow truck were stealing her soul. But it wasn't stealing. It was justice on wheels. I stood silently, arms folded, watching the truck lifted away. Watching Karen's grip on the narrative crumble. Watching Brad handcuffed, being led into the cruiser. His head hung low. The morning air was still cool, but I felt heat rising in my chest. Not anger, clarity. Karen had tried to spin it to blame me, to protect her son as always. But the truth was too obvious, the evidence too loud, the crash too final. This wasn't my fault. This wasn't my burden. Brad had crashed. Brad had lied. Brad had been caught. And for once, Karen couldn't save him. The truck was gone. The officers drove off, Brad in the back seat. Silence settled on the street again, broken only by Karen's ragged breathing and the faint hum of Sam's phone recording from above. Karen turned to me, her eyes blazing with a hatred so raw it felt like acid. "This isn't over, Maddox," she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. I just stared back. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's just beginning." Because what none of us knew that morning, standing in the wreckage of a fence and a truck, was that this crash wasn't the end. It was the spark that would ignite a much bigger fire, one that would drag the entire neighborhood into chaos. The morning the truck hit my fence should have ended with a tow truck, a citation, and maybe a court date for damages. That's what a normal neighborhood would expect. But Oak Street wasn't normal. Not with Karen Dawson running the HOA, and her son Brad treating the world like his personal playground. And as the flashing lights bathed the street in harsh red and blue, it became clear this wasn't going to be a simple property damage report. The first officer had cuffed Brad after his pathetic attempt at a field sobriety test. The second officer was still circling the wrecked truck, flashlight beam cutting through the broken glass and twisted metal. He leaned into the cab, moved some trash aside, and then his voice cut through the early morning quiet. "Found something. Passenger side floorboard. Nitrous oxide canister. Used whippet chargers." The words hit harder than the crash. Nitrous. Whippets. Not exactly the kind of thing you keep in your glove compartment for emergencies. I couldn't help myself. I let out a low whistle. "So the Mustang was running on dessert toppings?" I muttered, shaking my head. The first cop tried to keep a straight face, but I caught the twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Karen, though?" She exploded. "This is harassment. You're trying to frame my son," she shrieked, marching toward the officers like she owned them too. "Ma'am, step back," the officer said, his voice flat and sharp. "Interfere again, and you'll be the one in cuffs." That shut her up, at least for the moment. Brad, pale and wide-eyed, shuffled in the cuffs as the first officer guided him toward the cruiser. "It's not mine," he mumbled, voice cracking. "I swear it's not mine." The cop didn't even bother answering. He'd heard that line too many times. Meanwhile, the second officer wasn't done. He leaned into the cab again, this time reaching under the driver's seat. When he backed out, he was holding a cheap black burner phone. Not the shiny new smartphone Brad had called Karen with minutes earlier. No, this was the kind of phone you buy in cash. The kind you throw away after one too many risky calls. He powered it down, slipped it into an evidence bag, and exchanged a look with his partner. It wasn't just a "we found something" look. It was the kind of look that said, "This changes everything." Karen must have sensed it too, because her fury turned into something more dangerous. Fear. "That's private property," she snapped, her voice trembling. "You can't just—" "Ma'am," the officer cut her off. "Your son's vehicle was involved in a single-car accident on private property. That makes it a crime scene. Everything inside is subject to search." Her lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. For once, she had no comeback. The tow truck rattled its chains, lifting the mangled pickup onto the flatbed. Karen's composure cracked further as the reality sank in. Her son wasn't walking away from this one with a slap on the wrist. I stood there, arms folded, trying to keep my face neutral even as my mind raced. Nitrous, whippets, a burner phone. This wasn't joyriding. This wasn't boys will be boys. This was something deeper, something organized. Sam appeared at the door, holding a steaming mug of coffee for me like it was just another day. That's her strength, staying steady even when the ground shakes. "Got everything on the cams," she said softly, handing me the cup. The first officer finished Miranda rights, slid Brad into the back of the cruiser, and shut the door firmly. Brad didn't fight. He didn't yell. He just sat there staring blankly at the back of the seat like he couldn't believe this was happening to him. Karen, on the other hand, wasn't finished. "You can't do this!" she shouted, her voice shrill enough to wake half the block. "My son is a good boy. He's never been in trouble. You're destroying his future!" The second officer leveled a calm look at her. "Ma'am, your son's choices are what brought us here, not us. Not your neighbor. Him." The silence that followed was heavy. Even Karen didn't have an immediate answer for that. The officers wrapped up their notes, spoke briefly to me about insurance, and gave me the standard line about a report being ready in a day or two. Then the cruisers rolled away, Brad in the back seat. Karen left standing in the middle of the street, robe clutched around her, face pale with fury. I watched the tow truck disappear, the wrecked truck chained down like a fallen beast. For a moment the neighborhood was quiet again, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. But my gut told me this wasn't calm. It was the eye of the hurricane, because those officers hadn't just found evidence of reckless driving. They'd found nitrous, drugs, and a burner phone. And if there's one thing I knew, it was this. Burner phones aren't for calling mom to come bail you out. That meant Brad was hiding something. Something bigger than one stupid crash. I looked at Sam, and she looked back at me with that same thought shining in her eyes. "This isn't about the fence anymore," she said quietly. "No," I agreed, taking a sip of coffee even though it tasted bitter now. "It's about whatever's on that phone." We stood there for a long moment side by side, staring at the hole where my fence used to stand. The wreckage was gone, but the damage remained. And not just to the wood, to the neighborhood, to the truth. Neighbors had started peeking through curtains, whispering from behind glass. They'd seen enough to know the Dawson family's perfect image had cracked. But they hadn't seen what I'd seen, the look on those officers' faces when they found that burner phone. The sudden shift from routine accident response to something heavier, more serious. This was more than a reckless teen. This was a thread, and once it was pulled, who knew what would unravel? Karen eventually stormed back to her house, slamming the door so hard it rattled windows down the street. I knew she wasn't retreating. She was regrouping, plotting her next move. Karen never accepted defeat. And now that her son was in custody, she'd come after the nearest target, me. But even as I thought about the fight ahead, I couldn't shake the image of that phone in an evidence bag. What was on it? Who was he calling? Why hide it? Those were questions only the police could answer. But I had a sinking feeling we were about to find out, whether we wanted to or not. Because the truth is, a fence can be rebuilt. Boards can be replaced. But the secrets buried in a burner phone, those can burn down an entire neighborhood. And that's when I realized the crash wasn't just an accident. It was a breadcrumb. The nitrous, the burner phone, they weren't random. They were clues leading to something much darker hiding in our quiet community. And following that trail would change everything. The tow truck's rumble had barely faded when I knew it. Karen Dawson wasn't going to let this die quietly. Her son might have been cuffed, her perfect suburban image might have taken a blow, but if there's one thing Karen had mastered, it was retaliation. And when Karen retaliated, she didn't shout from the street. She didn't smash windows or throw punches. She had something far more insidious, the HOA. That very afternoon, while I was still sweeping up splinters from my fence, I saw her striding down the sidewalk. Silk robe replaced with a stiff blazer, lips pursed like she was heading into a boardroom battle. In her hands, a neon-colored notice stapled to a clipboard. She stopped at my mailbox. Eyes gleaming with venom, and without a word, she stapled the paper right to the wooden post. Whack, whack, whack. Each staple was like a gunshot. I walked over, broom in hand. "Tampering with federal property?" I said dryly. "That's bold, Karen." Her smile was sharp as glass. "So is ugliness," she hissed. "Expect daily fines until that eyesore is corrected." I glanced at the cratered remains of my fence, the broken boards still stacked neatly by the curb. "You mean the fence your son destroyed?" She ignored me, stapling one more time for emphasis, then turned on her heel and strutted off like she'd just won a war. I yanked the notice down and scanned it. Bright fluorescent paper, all caps headline, "Final warning. Property violation." The charges? Unsafe fencing, community hazard, and my personal favorite, unsightly debris. It was laughable. My fence hadn't been unsightly until Brad plowed his truck through it. But in Karen's world, truth didn't matter. Perception did. And if she could flood the neighborhood forum with her twisted version of events, then maybe, just maybe, she could salvage her reputation. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Sam's phone pinged. Karen had already posted a community safety alert to the HOA's online forum. Her exact words: "Some residents are encouraging chaos by keeping dangerous, non-compliant structures. Please report violations immediately." Attached to the post, a cropped photo of my shattered fence, carefully framed, of course, so you couldn't see Brad's truck-shaped imprint. Sam raised an eyebrow, then smirked. "Oh, this is too easy. What are you doing?" I asked. "Responding with facts." Her fingers flew over the keyboard, uploading the full crash clip from our door cam. She didn't stop there. She added a poll. Did the fence jump? Options: no and also. No within minutes, the votes were a landslide. Comment after comment rolled in. "That fence has been there for years." "Looks fine to me." "Pretty sure Brad's truck did the jumping." "Aggressive fence? That's a new breed." Our neighbor Mike even chimed in. "Aggressive fence update remains domesticated." I nearly spit out my coffee laughing. Karen, on the other hand, did not take it well. She replied with 16 exclamation points, followed by a paragraph about community values. Sam coolly pinned the police report number under her rant like a name tag. Game, set, match. But Karen wasn't done. A few days later, the HOA meeting rolled around. Normally, these gatherings were mind-numbingly dull. Landscaping budgets, mailbox paint colors, debates about whether patio umbrellas counted as permanent structures. Most neighbors half-dozed through them. This time, though the room buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread about the crash, the nitrous, the tow truck. People wanted answers, and Karen was ready to spin them. The clubhouse smelled like stale coffee and beige paint. Karen sat at the head table, flanked by her two loyal board members, sycophants who nodded at everything she said. She looked composed, polished, powerful, but I could see the crack in her armor, the tightness around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hand as she shuffled papers. She breezed through the usual agenda items, her voice syrupy smooth. Landscaping, budgets, mailbox paint. Then came new business. Her eyes scanned the room and locked on me. A cruel smile curved her lips. Finally, she announced, voice rising with theatrical authority, "We must address a serious issue of property neglect." The room shifted. Neighbors straightened in their folding chairs. "Mr. Cole Maddox of 112 Oak Street has allowed his property to fall into a state of disrepair," she continued, dripping venom. "This eyesore poses a hazard to the community and undermines our shared standards." I stayed quiet, hands resting calmly on the manila folder in my lap. She rattled off the fines. $1,750, effective immediately, with daily penalties accruing until remediation was complete. Then she leaned forward, relishing every word. "Mr. Maddox, do you have anything to say before the board votes to ratify these fines?" This was her stage, her chance to humiliate me publicly. She expected me to explode, to argue, to look like a hothead. Instead, I stood slowly, meeting her gaze. "I do, Karen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak." The folder opened with a satisfying snap. I pulled out a stack of papers and placed them on the table one by one. "First," I said evenly, "regarding the unsightly fence. As everyone here knows, my fence wasn't neglected. It was destroyed when your son, Brad Dawson, drove his truck through it at 5 in the morning while under the influence of nitrous oxide. Here is the official police report." Her smile faltered. "Second," I continued, laying down another stack, "regarding the daily fines for failure to repair. I have a signed contract with a fence company. Work will begin as soon as your insurance, currently processing the claim, approves payment. Here is the claim and my correspondence with the adjuster." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide. "Third, regarding the so-called non-standard construction. Here is the original city permit and inspection report, signed and approved 3 years ago. It explicitly states the fence meets all codes. And here," I dropped one more paper with deliberate precision, "is the original HOA approval form signed by you, Karen." The silence was electric. Karen's face went from smug to shocked to blotchy red. "And finally," I said, turning to the room, my voice calm but cutting, "this isn't about screws or fences. This is about retaliation. Mrs. Dawson is using her position to punish me because her son was arrested on my property for his own reckless actions. She is weaponizing the HOA against a homeowner to protect her image. That is the true hazard here." The words hung heavy. The board squirmed. The neighbors murmured. Karen slammed the gavel so hard it echoed off the beige walls. "Out of order!" she barked, but the spell was broken. Her authority, once absolute, now cracked in front of everyone. One board member cleared his throat nervously. "Karen, is this true?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. She stared at the pile of documents like they were snakes ready to strike, and that's when the voices of the neighborhood rose. "My stroller was almost clipped last week," one neighbor said. "I've heard engines racing past at night," another muttered. "Brad's car sounds like a lawnmower with rabies," a teenager snickered. Laughter rippled through the room. The tension shattered. Karen's allies avoided her gaze. "I move to table these fines indefinitely," one board member said. "Seconded," came three voices at once. Karen looked around desperately, but there were no allies left. Only skeptical faces. Her power for the first time had slipped, and I knew right then this was only round one. She'd been embarrassed, cornered, stripped of her weapon. But a cornered Karen was a dangerous Karen, because if she couldn't crush me with HOA fines, she'd find another way. Everything. What none of us realized that night was that Karen's war had only just begun. The HOA battle was just a skirmish, because in the shadows, Brad's burner phone was about to reveal a secret that would drag us all into something far bigger than broken fences and petty fines. By the time the dust settled from the HOA ambush, I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen would finally back off. She had been exposed, humiliated, and her power cracked in front of her neighbors. But Karen Dawson wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. She wasn't retreating. She was regrouping, and the real storm. It wasn't her fines or forum posts. It was her son's secret life, the one tied to that burner phone the police had bagged from his truck. Detective Miller had called me a week later. His tone was clipped, but there was an edge of excitement. "Mr. Maddox, we've been tracking activity from that phone. It pinged near your community clubhouse. Between midnight and 3 a.m., multiple nights in a row." My stomach tightened. The clubhouse wasn't just where Karen held her HOA meetings. It was also locked after hours, accessible only to board members with master keys. And who had the master key? Karen Dawson. Sam and I didn't need more to connect the dots. Brad wasn't just joyriding, he and his crew were staging something bigger. And his mother was either turning a blind eye or actively enabling it. So we decided to see for ourselves. Sam ordered a high-resolution drone with thermal imaging. Small, quiet, invisible at night. We spent a day practicing in our backyard, learning the controls. That night we launched it from our deck and sent it gliding silently toward the clubhouse. At first, nothing. Just darkness. An empty parking lot, still asphalt cooling in the night. Sam sighed. "Maybe we're wrong. Maybe it was a one-time thing." But at 12:45 a.m., headlights cut through the dark. A black Honda pulled into the far corner. 5 minutes later, a blue Subaru. Then another car. Within 20 minutes, the lot held 5 modified vehicles, their engines glowing hot on the thermal feed. We watched, breath held, as the drivers gathered, ghostly white shapes on the screen. They laughed, gestured, comfortable. One approached the side door, fiddled for a moment, and then the door swung open. The whole crew filed inside. "They have a key," Sam whispered, eyes wide. I didn't need to say it. We both knew who had given it to them. For an hour, we watched them move between the lot and the clubhouse. Cars being tuned, hoods popped, laptops out. It wasn't a hangout. It was a base of operations. We saved every second of footage. License plates, faces, heat signatures. And right in the middle of it all was Brad Dawson, grinning like a king in his castle. This wasn't just reckless driving. This was organized. And it was happening on HOA property, But getting footage wasn't enough. We needed to catch them in the act. So Sam and I crafted a plan. She built a fake online persona, Drift King 77, a shadowy seller of high-performance car parts. We posted an ad, fuel injectors for a WRX listed at a price too good to ignore. 2 days later, we got a hit. Username Subi02. The messages were sloppy, short. Yo, still got the injectors? Cash ready, Sam reeled him in. Yeah, tonight only. $400 cash. They agreed to meet at 10 p.m. in the parking lot of a Home Depot off Route 9. But this wasn't just a sting of our making. We'd already called in the cavalry. Detective Miller had listened patiently as we laid out the whole plan. The drone footage, the forum posts, the fake sale. By the time we finished, there was a pause on the line, then a low whistle. You two have built a case stronger than some of my detectives manage in months, he said. We'll be there. Don't you dare show up. Leave the rest to us. That night, Sam and I sat in the dark, phones on the coffee table, pretending to watch a movie while our nerves buzzed like live wires. At 10:15, my phone lit up with a text from Miller. Blue Subaru on scene. Honda with it. Mustang too. Group forming. Moving in 5 minutes. My heart pounded. 5 minutes later, another message. It's done. The next call came half an hour later. Miller's voice was steady but triumphant. We got them. All of them. Vehicles impounded, suspects in custody, including your neighbor's son. Relief washed over me, sharp and sudden. It was over. The midnight engines, the reckless danger, the secrets. They'd been caught. Or so I thought. Because that sting cracked the surface. But what spilled out went deeper than anyone expected. The impound search revealed stolen plates, illegal modifications, even a commercial storage unit key. With a warrant, police raided the unit and found an entire workshop. Stolen car stereos, equipment, and a ledger tracking every race, every bet, every theft, and whose handwriting filled that ledger? Brad Dawson's. The neighborhood buzzed like a hornet's nest. Karen's carefully manicured image collapsed overnight. Emergency meetings were called. Neighbors who once nodded politely now demanded answers. And for the first time in years, the board turned on its queen. Karen was stripped of her presidency in a unanimous vote of no confidence. Her allies resigned in disgrace. George, the quiet accountant, was appointed interim president. His first act? Changing every lock in the community. But the real reckoning came in court. The day of the trial, the courtroom smelled of floor polish and tension. Sam and I sat front row just behind the prosecutor, Ms. Davies. Across the aisle, Brad and his crew squirmed in stiff suits, looking like children at a funeral. Karen sat behind her son, her face pale but defiant, eyes boring holes into me. Piece by piece, the case unfolded. The 911 call, the officer's body cam, the delivery van's dash cam showing the street races, our drone footage of the clubhouse meetings, the sting operation, described in detail by Detective Miller. Then came the ledger, Brad's handwriting page after page, undeniable. The defense's last hope was Karen herself. She took the stand in a conservative Navy suit playing the part of the devoted mother. Her lawyer painted Brad as a passionate car enthusiast who fell in with the wrong crowd. But cross-examination stripped the act bare. Mrs. Dawson, Ms. Davies asked, holding up HOA security logs. Can you explain why you signed out a master key 2 months before these incidents and never returned it? Karen's face blanched. She stammered something about losing it, but the minutes from HOA meetings showed no report of any missing key. "Isn't it true," Davies pressed, "that you gave that key to your son and allowed him to use the clubhouse as a base for illegal activities?" Karen froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at her son, then at the jury. Tears welled, but not of remorse. They were tears of defeat. "I was just trying to protect him," she whispered. It was over. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on multiple counts. Brad and his friends faced probation, hundreds of hours of service, restitution for damages, and Karen's empire reduced to rubble. A week later, a for sale sign sprouted on the Dawson lawn. No one protested. In fact, the neighborhood seemed to breathe easier, but as I watched them pack boxes, I knew Karen wasn't leaving because she wanted to. She was leaving because she had lost her power, her reputation, her throne, and yet, as satisfying as it was to see her go, a part of me couldn't shake the question. What happens when someone like Karen loses everything? Because sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one with nothing left to lose. The sting had exposed the truth. The courtroom had delivered justice. But even as the Dawsons packed their lives into boxes, I couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't the end. Because when someone like Karen is cornered, the fight doesn't stop. It only changes shape. The day the moving truck pulled up to the Dawson house felt like the first truly quiet morning our neighborhood had seen in years. No revving engines, no late-night arguments, no HOA notices slapped to mailboxes like scarlet letters. Just the steady thump of cardboard boxes being hauled into the back of a rental truck. Sam and I watched from our porch, sipping coffee, the new cedar posts of my rebuilt fence gleaming in the sun. It stood taller now, sturdier, reinforced with steel brackets I had installed myself. Not just a fence anymore, it was a reminder. A line that said, "This is my home, and I will protect it." Across the street, Karen barked orders at the movers, her voice sharp but hollow. She wore oversized sunglasses that couldn't hide the redness around her eyes. The once feared HOA president looked smaller somehow, diminished. Not because she had packed up her possessions, but because she had lost the one thing she valued most: control. Her son, Brad, wasn't there. He was serving his probation hours at a local auto shop, scrubbing oil off concrete instead of burning rubber through residential streets. Word around town was he'd also been ordered to attend addiction counseling. Maybe it would help him. Maybe it wouldn't. That part wasn't my fight anymore. Neighbors gathered in quiet clusters, watching the Dawsons go. Some whispered, others shook their heads, but no one offered to help. A year ago, Karen would have had half the street jumping at her command. Now, not even a single hand lifted a box for her. When the last carton was stacked, Karen paused at the edge of her driveway and looked across the street at me. For a long moment, her face was unreadable, a mixture of bitterness, anger, and something almost like sadness. Then she climbed into her SUV, slammed the door, and was gone. Just like that. The reign of Karen Dawson was over. That night, our community held its first HOA meeting without her. The atmosphere was different, lighter, almost celebratory. George, the accountant-turned-president, ran it with fairness and calm efficiency. The agenda was short, budget approvals, garden club updates, and a proposal to fund new security cameras for the clubhouse. No screaming matches, no threats, no humiliation. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I'm not here to rehash the past, I told them. We all know what happened. But I will say this, rules matter. Boundaries matter. Not just fences and bylaws, but respect. If we don't respect each other, we lose everything that makes a neighborhood feel like home. There was a murmur of agreement. Heads nodded. For once, we weren't divided. Walking home afterward, Sam slipped her hand into mine. Feels different now, she said softly. Quieter, I agreed. Better, she corrected with a smile. And she was right. Life returned to normal, or at least a new version of it. The sounds of kids playing in yards replaced the roar of modified engines. Porch lights glowed at night, not because people were watching their backs, but because they felt safe again. My new fence became a small neighborhood landmark. People joked about how it had survived the truckpocalypse, and one neighbor even brought over a little wooden sign that read, "This fence doesn't jump." I nailed it to the gate with a laugh. But beneath the humor, I carried the deeper lesson. Karen had tried to weaponize power. She had tried to bend truth until it broke, to blame others for her son's mistakes, to punish anyone who stood in her way. And for a while, she succeeded, because too many people were afraid to stand up. But the moment truth was brought into the light, through evidence, through community support, through courage, her power crumbled. Lies can only survive in silence, and that's the moral I carry with me. Fences can be rebuilt. Cars can be towed. Titles like HOA president can come and go. But truth? Truth endures. And when you fight for it, you don't just protect your home. You protect your community. A few weeks later, I stood in my yard, hammer in hand, driving the last nail into a planter box by the new fence. Sam leaned on the porch railing, smiling at the finished project. "You think it's finally over?" she asked. I looked at the fence, the street, the quiet houses. For the first time in months, I felt peace. "Yeah," I said. "It's over." Stronger than before. And as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the rebuilt fence, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of a story. It was the start of a new chapter for me, for my family, and for our community, because justice had been served, because Karen was gone, because the truth had won, and that's the kind of ending worth fighting for. If you believe every homeowner deserves to stand strong against HOA bullies, hit that like button, subscribe to HOA Truth Tales, and join me for more stories where the truth always finds a way to break through the fence.